Hello, this is for Chapter 2 of our ethics reading for this week, and this video is about evaluating subjectivism. So, how things are going to go following the last video is that we're going to work through first subjectivism, and then relativism, and then objectivism to find problems with the views. So, evaluating subjectivism. Now, it seems reasonable that people do have different beliefs about moral issues, but could it really be wrong for me to lie or commit murder, but not wrong for you? Because remember, if you are in favor of subjectivism, this at least has to be in principle possible. Now, here's another way to think about subjectivism. This is the story from the reading about standing in line. It's on page 29 if you want to read along. To appreciate the implications of subjectivism, imagine that you've been standing in line at the theater. Suddenly, a strange man steps into line right in front of you. How would you react? You'd certainly object, telling him that he has no right to cut in front of you and in front of so many people, and that he should go to the end of the line. You might add that it's not fair for him to cut in line when no one else has. Note a few things about this very natural reaction. First, you're making moral claims here about fairness, rights, and what this man ought to do. In making these claims, you imply that the same obligations or rights hold for him no less than for everybody else. Moreover, you seem to assume that he, along with everyone else, already knows these things. All of this is part of the intuition that the same moral principles hold for everyone. And notice there that that works against subjectivism. Okay, but now the man makes an extraordinary reply. "I'm sorry," he says politely, "for I see that the fairness and rights you have just appealed to must hold for you. Perhaps they hold for other people here as well. You may have my sincere sympathy, for I can imagine how inconvenient these principles of yours must be. I bet you've been standing here for some time, right? What you must understand, however, is that these principles don't happen to hold for me. Each of us is bound by our own set of moral principles, you know? You have a principle of fairness. Fortunately for me, I do not. Please don't misunderstand. I always do my best to live an upright and moral life. And if fairness were one of my principles, I wouldn't dream of cutting in front of you. However, it's not. It's not one of my principles. And so, I'm perfectly within my rights to cut in front of you. As you probably didn't realize this when you started complaining, I assure you I take no offense. I hope we've now cleared up this little misunderstanding. By the way, can you step back a little bit? You're crowding me." This is the speech of a subjectivist. Would you stand for it? None of us really believes for a moment that this argument has any legitimacy. Okay, so notice that what's happening in the story there. The idea is that if you really believe in subjectivism, then you have to accept the explanation of the man cutting in front of you in line. A further problem with subjectivism is that you would never be able to assume that a moral principle that holds for you would also hold for others. This seems to conflict with morality's primary function, which is to regulate how individuals relate to each other. Right? So you can see what the problem is there. The problem is that if subjectivism is true, then we each have our own set of moral principles, And these don't have anything to do with regulating how we act with each other, which seems to be what morality's primary function is supposed to be. So, instead of giving us a different version of morality, subjectivism, in fact, gives us something close to no morality at all. Now, you may be wondering about subjectivism and your conscience. So, you may be worrying that without subjectivism, we don't have the ability to account for differences in our conscience. So, if my conscience tells me that it's wrong to drink alcohol, how can I account for the wrongness of my actions in a case where I drink alcohol? So, what the problem is here is that it seems like we might need subjectivism to account for these situations where my conscience tells me that something's wrong, that I shouldn't do something, excuse me. And then if I do that thing that my conscience told me I shouldn't do, it seems like we want to say that this is wrong. And the problem here is that it doesn't seem like without subjectivism we can come to that conclusion that violating what my conscience tells me to do is wrong. However, this can be dealt with by either relativism or objectivism, by including a moral principle. When a person feels strongly that some kind of act is morally wrong, then that person commits a moral wrong by acting that way. Now, I want to pause for a moment and talk about this principle. So notice that what it says. It says when a person feels strongly that some kind of act is morally wrong, then that person commits a moral wrong by acting that way. Okay? So this principle, importantly, only applies to our own conscience. So it's not the kind of principle that can apply to all people. So when a person feels strongly that some kind of act is morally wrong, then that person commits a moral wrong by acting that way. Only that person, not anyone else, if this moral concern follows from their conscience. So now I'd like you to ask yourself if you think that subjectivism survives these objections. Please let me know what you think.